SimWorld presents Around the Table with E and the Fat Man.
What's up, everybody? It's me, it's the B.O.B., and I am here with my man, E. E, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm getting better all the time, Bob. Thank you so much. Post-COVID, definitely not a long COVID situation. Clawing myself back on top.
Perfect. That's great. I know it's 2 weeks in a row. We're glad to have you back still. So hopefully you don't hopefully you don't get one of those second hits like some people.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, I didn't even take the Paxlovid. I don't want that Joe Biden rebound thing. I don't need that.
Well, everybody, this is Around the Table with E and the Fat Man. I am the Fat Man. That is E.
That's me.
We talk about pretty much anything sports related, but today we have another special episode where we're going to learn a little bit more about Eric here. So, yeah, we're going to learn a little bit about you. I mean, you are the voice of SimWorld when it comes to you do all the games for us whenever we had or last season. Expect you to probably be on most of them this coming season.
I will be, and I'll certainly be doing the marquee games.
Yeah, and I mean, people want to know a little bit about you, so are you ready?
Learn a little bit about me, and who knows, maybe I'll learn a little something about myself today.
Are you ready for the people to learn about you?
Bring it. I am. It's an AMA today. Ask me anything. So let's do it.
So I think one thing that people will learn right away from you just talking to you is that you've moved, or it seems like you move a lot. Where are you from originally?
Well, I mean, I suppose I kind of got that in my veins a little bit because I was actually born right outside of Washington, D.C., but I have no memories of that. Spent hardly any time there. And, I grew up a military brat, actually, in that my dad had been in the Army. He got drafted, during the Vietnam era, but both before he got drafted and after he came out as a civilian was working for the Department of Defense.
Oh.
So, as happens when you're got a military family, you tend to bounce around a little bit. So as a kid, I went from the D.C. area to a place in Indiana, then back to Ohio, then another place in Indiana, and then back to Ohio after that. But where I kind of consider that I come from, and where I usually, when I'm telling the shorter version, where I tell people I'm from, is from a tiny town called Barnesville, Ohio, which is in the eastern Appalachian part of the state of Ohio. Closest place that's any place is Wheeling, West Virginia, and not even a lot of people, not even everybody knows that. But think between Pittsburgh and Columbus, basically. But I went to high school there. Actually moved there when I was in 8th grade. And actually where I lived and where my parents' house is still there is on the same unpaved dirt road where my mother and her 8 brothers and sisters were all born and raised. Yes, a proper hollow, dog hollow, as a matter of fact. Cat hollow is the next hollow across the way. So yes, I grew up a poor redneck child. Is what it all boils down to.
Well, you said obviously it sounds like you have a lot of family. Like, do you have brothers, sisters, anything like that?
So I do have a huge extended family through, particularly my mother's side. My dad came from a family of 4. Still not tiny, but nothing like the 9 on my mom's end of things. I have one sister who is considerably younger than me. My sister Katie is 9 years younger than I am. And both my mother's passed away, but my dad and my sister both still live back in Ohio. They're in Columbus, in the Columbus area now, both of them. Yeah.
So where are you at now?
Yeah, so, well, I'll tell you what, Bob, I'll even give you a brief history of where I've been since there, because I have bounced around a little bit. I initially went to college at Ohio University, which is Athens, Ohio, which is not that far from where I grew up. The Bobcats, that's right, trounced Akron yesterday in our homecoming game. I saw that. But after that, I moved to New York, lived in New York City for about 10 years, which was an interesting transition going from being a hillbilly to landing in Manhattan. But but after about a decade there in New York, lived in London, in England, for just about 5 years before I came back to the U.S. and moved to California, the L.A. area, where, oh boy, I mean, that's been about the past 15, 16 years now, until very recently. Part of the reason why I've probably been sounding funny on the broadcast is I've been on this 3 weeks ago, started a road trip that ended in COVID, but it was all about moving, relocating back to the Midwest, as a matter of fact. Just have a new house moving into literally later today, unpacking boxes, north of Chicago in a town called Highland Park.
So Chicago.
Northern, yeah, north. It's called the North Shore, so just north of Chicago, up near Evanston. So Northwestern University, around there.
Did you pack your bulletproof vest?
I know. Yeah, there was a recent unfortunate. By the way, that happened, I think, like 2 days after we closed on the house, too. By the way, and to add a final punchline, the house we purchased was being sold by a British couple who'd actually lived here in America for quite some time, but had told us, and again, before this all happens, had told us that part of the reason they were moving back to England was because they were terrified of gun violence. So then lightning strikes, and yes, that crazy guy that I think we've all seen the picture of decided to shoot up the parade.
Yeah.
Hey, as a quick side note about that too, that guy, his name is Bobby Cremo, I believe, performed. Actually, had a small, not even a small, but halfway decent following on Spotify and elsewhere, performing as Awake the Rapper. I listened to some of it the other day, and it's so irritating because it's not terrible.
You gotta hate that whenever somebody who's so talented just kind of flushes their life away, and other people's, obviously. And I'm there listening to it, and I'm like, damn it, this is actually not bad. I'm so mad. Well, your time in London, is there anything that you liked more about it over there, or is there things that you missed being over there from America?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an interesting, it's kind of just fun and interesting being someplace else that isn't America, but at the same time, they speak 90% the same language you do, which is really helpful. But I actually have a lot of friends and things over there, still good friends. I'm even godfather to a little English boy. Oh. Yes. But, bringing it back to sports for a second, I grew up playing soccer as a kid. I'm a soccer fan, and I wasn't a fan necessarily of Chelsea Football Club, but when I moved over there, I lived almost literally next door to their stadium. So I got a season ticket. And I started going to Chelsea matches all the time. And this was right around the era, for anybody who knows soccer, when Chelsea started to become, like one of the big time teams in English and even European football. So it was jumping on a bandwagon at the right time. But, the culture of going to English soccer matches, it's very different than going to American sports. There's singing involved and all kinds of things. It's just a little bit different, but it's also a lot of fun, and would definitely admit I'd miss that for sure.
Sounds like I know in our professional sports, you never ever see anything like that. College is a completely different atmosphere. It sounds similar to that.
College, I was going to say college comes the closest to it. But almost like an intense rivalry, every weekend. Like every game is Ohio State, Michigan, or, Florida, Georgia or something.
Yeah. How did you have to drive over there? How was driving on the wrong side of the road?
I did have a car over there, which was a terrible idea. And honestly, me having a car in America isn't a great one. But the worst thing about it is that, not unsurprisingly, I mean, I am an American. Even when I was living over there, I would come back over to visit my family or various reasons to bring me back to the U.S. And sometimes I'd be driving. And the worst thing is I'd have moments, if I was alone, if there were no other cars, no other traffic around me, both in the UK and the USA, where I'd go, oh my God, wait a minute, what side of the road am I supposed to be on? We just have a little mini panic attack because you have to remember the opposite side. And I will say one other thing, which is more probably earlier than most Americans anyway, I started to learn about roundabouts. I started to learn about roundabouts about 15 years ago. Now I'm starting to see them everywhere, even in the U.S. Everywhere. I know Kentucky got their first one. A friend was telling me the other day. That was an adjustment, and I probably scared the hell out of a few English drivers learning how to navigate those too back in the day.
Well, you've done a whole lot of moving. Is there anybody or something or whatever that has made some of these moves with you?
No, not until the most recent one. I got hitched about 7 years ago now, a little bit more than. So actually, coming back here to north of Chicago, up on Lake Michigan, is the area that my wife basically grew up in. She's from a nearby town called Winnetka, about 10 or 15 minutes away from Highland Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You said you got married 7 years ago.
Correct. Yeah,
So
we've been
long?
together before then, but we met in Los Angeles. So yeah, we've actually been together. How long? Probably 15 years together, all told.
Wow.
But we lived in Los Angeles or nearby in Santa Barbara that whole time until this big move just now.
That's awesome. I know this whole episode's about you, but when we did my episode, I hope my wife never listens to it. Because I accidentally said the wrong day for our wedding.
Hey, that's okay. I'm terrible with dates and numbers. That's fine. I'm with you.
That's why I was like, I questioned whether or not I should ask you, well, how long have you been together for? It's like,
right. That's like, oh my God, a long time.
It's like once it hits 5, it just pretty much runs all together.
I know. Yeah. I forget how old I am frequently, so that's fine.
Well,
I just say old anymore.
Yeah. How old are you?
Oldish.
Yeah,
oldish. Yeah.
Well, moving around a lot. I mean, being a sports fan, did you really get in? Were you able to get into sports with how much you've moved whenever you were a kid and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I did play soccer fairly heavily. I also played a lot of baseball. Probably my best sport, if you want to call it a sport, is bowling. Yeah, I have my own 16-pound ball, custom made. Oh yeah, the whole thing. If I am playing regularly, I will average up. I don't want to say I would average a 200, but I would average up toward the number. Fairly decent on my roll on my day. But no, yeah, soccer and baseball were kind of my two biggest sports as a kid. And then my baseball experience actually came in really handy when I did move to London, as I discovered the British Softball League over there and briefly starred. I believe I discussed this for a minute in a prior episode, actually. But yes, my baseball skills turned me into a star fielder and power hitter, which I didn't realize I was until I was playing in the British Softball League.
Until you were over there.
Yes, correct.
Well, what was your favorite sport to play? And it doesn't have to be one that was organized. Like, did you have a favorite sport to play? Yeah. I mean, I certainly loved playing football as a kid, but I never played organized. I was always more of a, backyard football player, American football player, obviously talking here. Definitely a favorite, but, baseball too, I would say. Again, never was a star, was never that good. Stopped playing actually when I hit the high school level, basically. So, after T-ball, Little League, Babe Ruth kind of thing is when my American baseball career came to an end. But definitely love the game, and it is something too where I suppose even now I could join up with some kind of a softball league here, and still credibly be able to play middle infield and probably be the number 8 hitter. But that's fine. Well, so you've mentioned baseball, you've mentioned soccer, bowling, football.
There's one I haven't.
What's your connection with basketball?
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
What's your
I didn't mean to jump there, but I realized that's right.
What's your connection with basketball?
So, never was great at playing the game. Can't dribble to save my life. Can shoot a little bit. But was never skilled at that game. However, I've always been a huge fan of basketball. I would say that, in terms of fandom, funny, I have been talking about baseball, but I'm not much of a baseball fan anymore. And really, at no time was it ever probably in my top three just for kind of like following sports. Certainly NFL football, but also basketball, and particularly, as I mentioned, I grew up partially in Indiana, certainly in the Midwest, and back during the Bob Knight era.
Oh, yeah.
Also helped by the fact that my dad is an Indiana University graduate. Became a huge fan of Indiana Hoosiers college basketball,
Oh, yeah.
and still is probably my number one fan interest to this day. So, if anything, I am more of a follower of college hoops than I am NBA. Not that I don't pay attention to the NBA and don't love the NBA, but absolutely love college ball, and do live and die a little bit with my Indiana Hoosiers, and hasn't been a wonderful couple of decades, but I actually really like this year's team. I really like where our relatively new coach, last year, first season new coach, Mike Woodson, former Hoosier himself, longtime NBA player and coach. We're recruiting well. I like what he's got going on with the team. We're Big Ten favorites this year. Fingers crossed. I think we're going to have a really nice season.
Well, so obviously Indiana Hoosiers is probably your favorite team. Do you have a favorite pro team, or is it sounds like maybe you're just like a fan of the game?
I do, but I'm a little bit malleable in that way, in that from the 10 years that I lived in New York City, I used to go to Madison Square Garden all the time. And this is back during the big Pat Ewing, Pat Riley, John Starks era. Some really good Knick teams that, went deep in the playoffs, went to the finals a few times, and I got to go to some finals games actually even, but never won, of course, never took home a trophy, but through that, definitely became a big Knicks fan. But then it's funny, I lived all those years in Los Angeles as well, and just from listening to sports radio and everything, I'm also a little bit of a Lakers fan. I mean, I loved Kobe. I loved Kobe. Some of those teams, some of those championship teams, and again, actually got to go to some finals games at Staples Center, what is now crypto.com. But through that, kind of picked them up as a B team. And, I've just moved to Chicago, and I am an open admirer of Lonzo Ball. So maybe if he gets back to health and they start to get a little bit better, I'll also become a little bit of a Bulls follower. Who knows? My fan interest isn't as, deeply rooted as it is with, Hoosiers basketball on the NCAA level, but definitely the Knicks, and kind of put it in like college terms. My major would be the Knicks, my minor would be the Lakers.
So you mentioned Ewing, Kobe, Ball.
Yeah.
Do you have like a top 3 favorite players of all time?
Oh boy. Yeah. I mean, I probably would, but again, it gets a little bit kind of highly individualistic, I guess you might sort of say.
It's hard.
It is, and it is. I mean, like I can't resist throwing out somebody named Jay Edwards. I'm sure you never heard of Jay Edwards. Jay Edwards, right around when was this? I think early 1990s. Played 2 or 3 years for IU, for Indiana, before he made a tragic mistake and went pro. I think he played like 5 games for the Clippers, and that was his NBA career. But Jay Edwards, you can go onto YouTube and find some videos of him. He was kind of like the big shot Rob Horry of the early 1990s Big Ten. Just had a knack for hitting game-winning buzzer beaters from any spot on the court. Was always a huge Jay Edwards fan. Would name Jay Edwards. But in addition to that, actually, there's something about the big guys I've always liked. So I always was a Sean Bradley fan. I kind of admired him for hanging as tough as he did, to have the length of career that he managed to have, because he just wasn't that skilled, quite frankly. But used his 7'6" frame effectively, stayed healthy for a guy that shape and size, which is pretty remarkable, and had an impressive career that way. And if I had to pick a third, I mean, it probably would be Kobe, just because I get
Kobe.
the impression, yeah, because of Kobe. I get the impression, I mean, like, I have some sympathy for Shaq. I have a feeling it would be tough to be Kobe's teammate. I think it would be impossible to be his friend. He's just that guy. Same like Jordan, right?
Yeah.
It's probably tough to be around you in reality. But, to watch you play this game, to have that kind of force of will and everything else, yeah, it's something to see. It was crazy when he passed away, and I was still in LA at that point, of course. And I would have to put Kobe on that list too, I think.
Yeah, I think when that happened, I just happened to be walking by a TV at that particular time, and it was just still on and popped up, and it mentioned it. I didn't believe it at first.
Yeah, I know. When the first person who told me was like, I thought they were joking.
Yeah.
Or that Kobe was mad at somebody or something.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. What do you mean? Kobe's gone? What? Yeah. No, I mean, there's been a few sports things like that in my life. I remember where I was when I heard Magic Johnson was HIV positive, and I remember where I was when somebody told me that Kobe had died.
Yeah. Well, it kind of turned this into a little bit of a sad episode. Dark, huh? Let's turn it around a little bit. What brought you to SimWorld?
Well, that would be Roniel, leader of the pack. I met Roniel, and basically he sold me on what we're doing here with SimWorld. Maybe I didn't need a whole lot of selling because I love the idea. I am actually a big simulation game guy, and I mean, I'm talking like geeky sim games. What are some examples I could give would be some people are going to be familiar with a game called Championship Manager, which is a soccer simulation game. Yep, loved it. Was one of my favorite games of all time. Sid Meier's Civilization, which again, I love the Civ series. I love all that stuff. So I'm a big fan of simulation games. I'm a big fan of basketball. And I'm a big fan of what, Roniel told me his vision for SimWorld was. So that's really what brought me in. And then people told me they like my voice. So here I am calling games.
Oh, yeah. Let me be honest real quick. When you said that you liked... I can't believe that you play video games or that you're like a video game fan. I would have pegged you as somebody who has never touched a video game. Except maybe maybe in an arcade.
You're right, sure. No. Definitely have. And I mean, I like the Twitch-based stuff too, all of your Maddens and your FIFAs and all the rest of that. But I will admit that, I mean, my whole life I really have been into like dorky simulation games, but over the last probably 10 years, it's been my focus. Wargaming stuff too, like hex-based war games, that you had paper and, back in the day. In fact, I think somebody should revive that and bring those back online. But I'm a fan of all that sort of simulated world stuff. So being drawn into SimWorld was a pretty natural one for me.
So what are your thoughts on The Sims?
I like The Sims fine. It was fine. I was never a heavy player, I would admit. But I did do some SimCity back in the day. Actually more SimCity than The Sims. But I have played The Sims, and yes, I mean, like I said, there's things which are not simulation too, which I could tell you about. I mean, Worms. I don't know if you ever played Worms, but I was a big Worms fan.
little army worms and stuff like that.
Yeah, those little army worms throwing the holy hand grenade at each other and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, so again, I know we turned down that little bit of a dark road, but now we got why you're here in SimWorld. Well, let me ask you this. What do you see this being? Do you have I don't want to call it an end game, but where do you see this in 5 years, or what do you expect this to be in 5 years?
Well, I mean, what I'd love to see happen, I guess to the degree that I have a vision for it, it's almost a vision of like what I could do within it if I wasn't actually directly involved in it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because like being involved in a player sim side, I mean, I'm sure I'm not unique in the world this way, but of course, I like to indulge the fantasy of, what if I was just a hair under 7 foot instead of just a hair under 6 foot, like I am in real life. Like what would have been different for me? Would I, how far could I have kind of gone? Would I have made D1? Could I have gone even further? Who knows? So being able to kind of like have that virtual experience, have that kind of meta experience, that's something that would definitely appeal to me. And obviously, in a coaching way as well. Already talked about Championship Manager. Obviously, I have a Jones for that kind of a thing too. On up to the ownership and the GMing side of things, and even the rest of the stuff that Ron Yell's got in the back end and in the front of his mind for SimWorld in terms of the whole media world surrounding it and all of this. And I think in a general sense, we're getting into a interesting time with gaming and digital more broadly. With Web3. I'm a Web3 believer. I think that this is going to be the new big thing over the next 5-10 years. And, SimWorld fits right into that too. So really just kind of like building out, broadening into a big universe of, people who are populating this and making it a real world. I want to see it get so big that, we have to start spawning off mini universes. There's SimWorld 1 and SimWorld 2 just because we got too many people, gotta open up a second world, parallel world. I mean, alternate universe.
There's only 32. Well, I mean, I guess technically
that's right.
There's only 32 pro teams, but I mean, that's honestly with what our guys can do, that's not the limit. There is no limit at all for what we can do.
Just keep on opening up parallel universe after parallel universe. Yeah.
And then
I love it.
Then we're going to have some type of multiverse where
I was going to say, there is a Doctor Strange angle to this whole thing too. That's right. Somebody's crossing them and yeah.
Well, Eric, one thing that I think, at least I really know you for, is you love your top threes.
I do like a good top three.
So do you have currently a top three sports figures?
So within the current sports world, it's all going to come back to the teams that I follow most closely, right? Yeah. So if I had to pick three right now, being a big Indiana Hoosiers fan, we've well established that. You may be familiar with Tracy Jackson Davis. He is the rarest of things, which is a 4-year player at the college level. Coming back for this. I know. Haven't heard of that before, have you? Hasn't transferred, hasn't left, hasn't gone pro. I admire Tracy actually because his time in Indiana hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. He came in under a different coaching staff. There's been turnover. There's been bad years. There's been struggles. But he's really stuck it out. The kid should be, up there mentioned with guys like Steve Alford and Isaiah Thomas, et cetera, as far as IU legends for what he's done. So I would definitely name TJD, Trace Jackson Davis. Talked about soccer. My favorite soccer team is a Scottish team in Edinburgh called Hibernian FC. And we have a fantastic player in the side right now named Martin Boyle, who's a winger, which means he plays in an attacking position up the park, but out on one of the wings, out on one of the sides, and absolute goal machine. Love watching Martin play. And then if I had to pick a third for right now for the real world, I was talking about my my little Sean Bradley fetish and my love of the big guys. I might have to throw. I mean, I've known about him for a little while. I've been following him for a minute, maybe a minute longer than most folks, but he's still very new on the scene. But oh, please stay healthy, Victor Wembanyama. I think that you are going to be magical. I don't know if anybody out there got to watch the France 92 versus G Ignite game the other night where he squared off against Scoot Henderson. But man, the things he can do inside and outside on defense. He's not super athletic, but he's graceful. I guess that's what I would say. He's got good timing. He's got good instincts out there. Victor may just be, he's healthy, which is a monster. He could be a game changer. So I'm going to throw Victor into my list.
Do you think he's comparable to anybody in the NBA right now?
Right now? The closest, yeah, he is, and the closest one is probably Kristaps Porzingis.
Okay.
And if you remember Zinger's first couple seasons in New York, he was amazing. He was great.
Yeah.
Then he fell out with the New York front office, which is probably fair enough. Anybody would do that.
That's kind of status quo, I think. For
that's
Knicks.
That's just a sign of mental health and stability. So obviously, the New York situation didn't work out, and then he was hurt the entire time he was in Dallas, and was hurt most of his year in Washington, even. So that's my fear with Victor is that his comparable is Kristaps, and look what happens to Kristaps and a lot of guys that are built that way. Frankly, the human body's not necessarily engineered to be that big, that tall, and to be running up and down a court and jumping and pounding your knees out like that. And,
It's amazing. Like there's two that really like pop into my mind when it comes to big guys, like the way that a career could possibly go is you have Shaq. How did he do it for as big as he was? Like most of them we're talking about are like, they're not these big guys, but this dude's, I'm giving him 320. It was more than 320. I'm sorry. But he's like 7'1", 320, running up and down the court, and he lasted forever. Yeah. But then you have what could Yao Ming have been? Right.
And for me being a little bit older, at least than you, Bob, my memory goes back to Ralph Sampson, former Virginia Cavalier and Houston Rocket. And, the first couple seasons he was playing with Olajuwon in Houston, I mean, they were on the same level, basically. They were a two-headed monster, twin towers down there.
Yeah.
Ralph was a double-double machine. I think averaged like 24 and 12 over his first couple seasons when he was still getting better, by the way.
Yeah.
and then his knees blew out and never got it back.
Yeah.
And that's the guy who always comes to mind too for me.
Yeah. Well, so you've named a whole lot of sports teams. I think I'll answer number one for you. Do you have a top three sports teams? Indiana Hoosiers, I'm assuming, is your number one.
Yep. They are. They definitely are. But if I had to pick, and there's going to be a few teams that I'll give some apologies to. Like I am a Red Sox fan, but they're not making the list. I am still a Chelsea fan from my days of being a season ticket holder there, but they're not making the list. It would be IU, college basketball, college sports to a degree, but college basketball really. Number one, Hibernian FC in the Scottish Football League up in Scotland. They're not that good and they never win anything, but I follow them regularly. And then third, and coming up later this weekend, my Dallas Cowboys in the NFL. Well, again, you got to remember when I was a little kid, that was the Roger Staubach, Tony Dorsett, Preston Pearson, Drew Pearson, Tony Hill kind of era. America's team, the Doomsday Defense, Hollywood Henderson, and all the rest of this. And yes, I got it in my blood at that point. I actually have a signed picture of Roger Staubach wishing me a happy birthday that my dad, a Washington Redskins lifelong fan to his credit, got for me when I was a kid. Still a big Cowboys fan for sure.
Are you worried at all that they may not win the NFC East?
What I will say is I think they are going to win the NFC East. I know people are talking up the Eagles right now, but I don't think they're for real. I think Dallas is going to be just fine. We're doing just fine without Dak, and once we get Dak back, we're going to be okay. I'm looking forward to those two Eagles-Cowboys matchups this year. I think they're going to decide the East. I know the Giants are doing surprisingly well, but I think it's going to come down to Dallas and Philly, as it should probably. And all right, I'm a homer, and I admit it, but I'm liking my Cowboys to back-to-back the East.
I don't know. The Giants just pulled off that win in London over the Packers.
I'm impressed with them, and I'm impressed with Saquon. Saquon's having a nice rebound here for sure, but
gotta stay healthy.
Got to stay healthy. Yep, key to so much.
Well, let's get away a little bit from the sports aspect of everything we've talked about today. So, do you have what's your favorite kind of music? What are your favorite bands?
Oh boy. So I have a very broad taste in music. It would be easier to name the things that I, don't really listen to or don't much like. And there are a few things I don't care for. For whatever reason, I've never been a fan of like reggae and calypso kind of music, whatever. Bob Marley and all that it's just I don't know what or ska, just never kind of warmed up to that. I would also say, I've never been a big country music fan, but what I will say is there was a PBS documentary, a Ken Burns documentary on country music that came out a couple years ago that I would recommend to anybody. Because first of all, it's just a great almost history of America. You really can't separate it from country music in some way, and the origins and everything, just really, really fascinating. Don't know that it made me a country music fan. That might be a bit of a stretch, but there were probably 10 or 12 songs ended up slipping onto my master Spotify list that I got from out of that. But if I had to name favorite bands, and I guess I'll have to pick three because three is our number. So I'll pick one that everybody knows, and I'll pick two others that are more obscure. The one that everybody knows is the Beatles. I mean, I think if you're not a fan of the Beatles to some degree, it's hard to be a fan of music at all. They invented a lot of this, quite frankly. Again, talking about a documentary thing, if you get a chance to watch the Get Back Beatles documentary, that I think that was Peter Jackson put that together. Really entertaining to watch that whole thing. But the two more obscure, one would be a band that is no longer around out of Texas. Called the American Analog Set.
Oh, okay.
I was a huge fan of the Aman Set, as they were sometimes called. Kind of like airy, breathy, like almost some, like some early Toro y Moi. Kind of sounds a little bit like that, I would say. But I was a big fan of the Aman Set. And the third band is something called Black Moth Super Rainbow.
Oh, okay.
Some folks, yeah, BMSR. It almost defies classification. It's something, but it sounds like electronic music, or you might call it that off the top of your head. Although interestingly, all of the music is purely analog. Like they're making all of these sounds organically. It's just very, very different, but I'm a huge fan. I've actually met the main guy in the band. Actually, I've met the whole band at one of their shows. But not a big name, but yeah. So very eclectic, very odd. But I'm going to throw out the Beatles, the American Analog Set, and Black Moth Super Rainbow. Oh, and there's something very recently I've started listening to. Very much under the radar, but a guy from Australia. From Brisbane, Australia, I think, as a matter of fact, who performs under the name Golden Vessel, and yeah. Again, nothing anybody's going to ever heard of, but I don't know. Some of the music sounds like maybe a little bit of nerd in there. You can almost kind of hear he works with this guy named Ray Sola, who even sounds and looks a little bit like Pharrell. It's interesting stuff. Very off the radar, but if you're looking for something new to check out, try a little Golden Vessel.
Guess we can't get over the name.
Yeah, it's an interesting name.
Have you seen the Golden Vessel?
I know. And almost nobody has.
Well,
I don't even know how I found it.
The internet's a crazy thing.
Yeah, that's probably where it comes from.
Well, do you have any favorite things that you like? You obviously mentioned documentaries. Do you have any favorite shows or any top three favorite shows, top three favorite movies, anything like that?
Oh boy. I mean, I could probably give you both if I wanted, but in terms of just thinking about favorite TV shows, and if I'm giving you an all-time list here, to make the cut really easily, One would be Family Guy.
Yeah.
Family Guy is just infinitely rewatchable. It's 90% of my TikTok feed is Family Guy clips because TikTok figures out what you want to see, and it knows that I just want to see 10-second funny little lines from Family Guy. Would throw that out there. The other one that would 100% make my TV list for all time would be a show called The Larry Sanders Show that was on HBO. It was back in the 90s. This was a fake, well, not, the premise was it was a real talk show hosted by not the real Gary Shandling, but Gary Shandling playing Larry Sanders, the main character. It was just one of the best things ever made on television. Lots of people who were relatively unknown at the time were on that show, kind of, we either got their start or got a huge boost out of being off on it, including completely unknown Jeremy Piven, Janine Garofalo, who was nobody at the time. Jon Stewart had a big role on the show when, again, he just sort of had his MTV show back then, wasn't anybody. Lots of other people. But great show. It was interesting. I always sort of respected Gary Shandling, and I'm a Gary Shandling fan. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple years ago. But at the time he made the Larry Sanders Show, he could have had any sort of real talk show on any network he wanted. His star was kind of at its ascendant point. And instead, he decided to do something wildly different, which was this show, The Larry Sanders Show. And always really respected him for zigging where anybody else might have zagged right there.
Yeah.
And really, really good. And then if I had to pick a third, with apologies to certain things like, Breaking Bad, which was great, and all the rest of this, I'd probably throw The Sopranos as my third favorite. Great series.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, never really got into it, never really watched it. I was also a little bit younger at that time too. I do know of the ending. Do you want to? What are your feelings on the way it ended?
Two feelings. I'm the kind of person who loves an ambiguous ending. It's like a choose your own adventure book at that point. You get to decide what happened, how it all went. So I David Chase, I thought, I know not everybody loved it. I personally actually loved the ending happening that way. And as for my own self and my own opinion of what happened, I think that the guy in the members only jacket came out of the bathroom and shot Tony in the back of the head at that point.
There you
It
go.
fades to black. It fades to black because Tony's life faded to black right then and there.
Well, there you go. That's how it ended. Don't tell me anything different. Well, Eric, I appreciate you taking the time to let SimWorld really get to know who you are. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to get out?
No, I guess we can fade to black too under a little bit less grim circumstances right here.
Well, everybody, really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us here on Around the Table. I'm Big Bob. That's E. Hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend.
We'll see you next weekend, folks.